I pushed the bathroom door open without thinking, expecting an empty room and a running shower. Instead, Lauren sat in the tub with Evan Mercer beside her, both of them startled water shifting around their shoulders. She froze. Evan rested his arm along the rim, as if nothing about this made sense to question. "What are you two doing in my house?" Lauren tried to gather words that wouldn't come. "It's not what you think," she said, voice unsteady. "We were just—" Evan cut in before she finished. "We needed to talk about the company's financial structure. It got late. This seemed like the easiest place." He didn't bother to look embarrassed. Lauren glanced at him, then back at me, searching for some version of a story they could both support. Neither moved away from the other. Her hand slipped beneath the surface, brushing his leg, a gesture she tried to disguise as shifting position. Evan inhaled, kept his gaze low, and waited to see my reaction. Lauren finally spoke again. "You've been so distant, Jonathan. You barely talk to me anymore. Someone had to step in and make sense of the mess you leave behind." That line hung there, flimsy and sharp at the same time. Evan let it sit like it added weight to whatever he planned next. I didn't respond to her accusation. No argument would change what I'd walked in on. My voice stayed even. "Both of you need to leave. Now." Lauren rose a little, reaching for a towel. "Can't we at least explain?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "There's nothing to explain," I said. Evan stood grabbing his shirt from the counter. "We really were discussing that loan paperwork," he added. "You'll see the file soon anyway." No details. No reason he should have had access to anything involving my company. He pulled on his clothes with a sort of casual confidence, whispering something to Lauren that she acted like she didn't hear. They walked past me without touching, yet some connection between them pulsed in the space they shared. Her perfume drifted as she moved down the hall, and Evan followed a few steps behind, carrying that same forced calm he used whenever he wanted people to underestimate him. The front door shut. Their voices faded along the walkway until the house settled into a stillness that felt unfamiliar. I headed to my office, needing something steady to focus on. The desk drawer sat slightly open, though I'd locked it earlier that week. Papers had shifted folders stacked differently from how I kept them. A pen I never used lay across the top file, as if someone had set it down in a hurry. The drawer sat shut, but the change in how the folders rested kept pulling me back. A slim stack of papers tucked beneath a file I rarely used carried handwriting that didn't match mine. Lauren's rounded letters marked the margins, and next to them Evan's sharper notes ran along the edges. The title at the top read, "Revised Ownership Structure." Several lines mapped out percentages and projected shifts in control. Arrows pointed to my name, then crossed through it. Their signatures appeared in the draft format column, not finalized but rehearsed. That part stung more than the discovery itself. This wasn't spur of the moment. They had practiced. The only thing to do was get dressed and head to the office. North Loop buzzed the way it always did on weekday mornings, yet something in the rhythm pushed against me. My team greeted me, though each of them paused long enough to sense an undercurrent. No one asked, and nothing was offered. Work had its own pulse, and I followed it into my office. A new message flagged my inbox. The sender was the lending division at a regional bank I'd never used. The subject line, "Loan Confirmation, Hail." The amount exceeded anything I'd ever consider borrowing. A PDF attachment showed my name, my address, my signature. The shape of it mirrored mine, but the strokes were too uniform, as though someone traced them. Marathon days at the company had trained me to respond through action. My chair slid back, and the server logs came up next. Access times didn't match my schedule. Several entries showed login attempts from home at hours when I wasn't there. Reviewing camera access records brought another anomaly. Someone had used admin credentials to authorize a download. Not a single outburst escaped me. Movement kept everything from spilling over. Screens filled with timestamps, usernames, and flagged mismatches. A pattern formed. Evan's old consultant ID had been reactivated a month before he left the company. That access should have been terminated. The next stop had to be someone who could verify the loan document. Marissa Grant worked near the courthouse, and her office ran a tight practice focused on financial disputes. She met me in a small conference room and flipped through the printed pages before saying a word. Her finger tapped the signature. "You didn't sign this," she said. "No. It's a clean copy of your mark, though. Someone had a sample to work from." She scanned the rest of the file. "This isn't a clerical error. Whoever drafted this intended for it to look legitimate. Are you certain you're the only person with access to your lockbox?" The question hung there. Lauren had insisted years ago that she needed a spare key for household matters. That rationalization returned now with a heavier meaning. Marissa slid the papers back toward me. "Gather everything you can. Don't remove or shred anything, and don't confront either of them yet." Her tone was steady, measured. Nothing she said tried to soothe or soften the reality. That helped more than any attempt at comfort would have. While walking back to the car, my phone buzzed with a string of missed calls from Lauren's sister. A message followed. "Please reach out. Lauren is worried. She says you aren't doing well." Another relative wrote, "Call when you can. We're concerned." They had moved quickly, setting a narrative before I could even respond to what I'd found. Lauren had always been skilled at reshaping events in her favor, but the speed this time carried intention. Returning home later, the house felt stretched thin with tension, though nothing had changed physically. My attention drifted towards the office again. The drawer remained closed, yet the need to confirm everything led me back. A portable drive sat next to the keyboard. That drive held a series of audio files from old internal meetings. They shouldn't have been touched. Curiosity pushed me to plug it in. Each meeting date lined up until one file jumped out. Its summary length didn't fit the others. Opening it brought up a recording with small distortions. A portion of my voice sounded clipped, then reinserted in a context that suggested I'd advocated altering ownership stakes. The splice wasn't smooth, but convincing enough for someone looking to support a predetermined narrative. The breath I took next tasted sharp. Not fear, recognition. Someone had gone to lengths far beyond personal betrayal. This was calculated, a methodical build toward something larger than a marital fracture or a bad decision in a bathtub. The screen dimmed as the recording ended. Another audio icon loaded automatically, time-stamped from the same week. Hearing the artificial shift in tone, the unnatural cadence pushed me to pause the playback. The cursor hovered over the list for a moment longer, while I waited for the drive to signal its next prompt. The recording stayed on my mind through most of the morning, so I took it with me when heading toward Bidemakaska. The lake path offered enough movement for my thoughts to settle into some sort of order. I played the audio again while walking, letting the file run without interruption. Most of it matched the meeting I remembered: routine updates, technical decisions, budget concerns. Then a line surfaced that didn't belong. My voice said, "We'll transfer the shares next quarter," in a tone too clipped to be natural. The phrasing didn't match how I usually spoke in meetings. Another sentence followed, cut from a different conversation altogether. Anyone listening casually might accept it as valid, but the splice exposed itself after a few replays. A quick check of the metadata revealed something worse. The file had been sent from an old backup email account linked to my name. Only one person still knew the password to that account. Lauren insisted on keeping it years ago, claiming she needed access for household bills. That justification returned now, with sharpened meaning. My thumb hovered over the stop button. The lake breeze carried the weight of that realization, though it didn't change the path beneath my feet. People passed by in pairs, some with coffee cups, others with dogs tugging their leashes. Their lives moved forward in easy rhythm, while mine tilted further off balance with each new discovery. The phone buzzed with Marissa's name on the screen. Her voice came steady, direct. "Jonathan, I reviewed the loan documents again. There's a co-signer listed Evan Mercer." Hearing his name spoken aloud added a rough edge to the call. He tied himself directly to the loan. "Yes, that means he either prepared it or participated knowingly. You need to prepare for questions from your board." She paused to gather her next thought. "I already received a copy of a notice. They want you to explain the loan's purpose and how it benefits the company." The board never contacted me that early in the week unless something serious was happening. The pressure grew with each passing hour, pushing me toward a place I didn't want to go. People in leadership positions often say, "Control what you can." That sentence felt thin now. Another alert came through after we ended the call. A former employee, one who left on good terms, sent a brief message. "Someone is building a file on you. Be careful." No explanation. No follow-up. The tone suggested urgency, without giving me anything to work with. A part of me leaned toward stepping back, letting the situation die down, allowing attorneys to handle it. That instinct had guided most of my life: avoid escalation, keep the peace focus on solutions rather than conflict. That approach opened the door for this mess. My silence had created space for others to write their own narratives. Walking the last stretch of the path, I replayed the doctored audio one more time. My own voice sounded foreign. Whoever manipulated the file knew exactly how to mimic the cadence of internal meetings. Someone wanted a paper trail that blamed me for decisions I never supported. I returned to the car and sat for a moment, fingers gripping the steering wheel. No anger surfaced, just a dawning awareness of how far the scheme reached. There was no room left to minimize anything. Driving home took longer than usual, though traffic moved normally. Each turn of the wheel carried the feeling that appointments, routines, and familiar places had shifted into something less reliable. The garage door opened with its usual rumble, yet even that felt altered by everything I'd learned. Walking toward the back entrance, something caught my attention. The lock on the rear door had been replaced. A new metal core sat where my original one should have been. The edges still held small shavings from installation. My key didn't fit. Lauren hadn't lived in the house for weeks, and Evan had no valid reason to access this door. Someone had chosen to change that lock without telling me. That act said more than the doctored audio or the forged loan. It reached into my daily life, shifting control inch by inch. The locksmith arrived within an hour. He studied the rear door, ran a tool along the latch, and stepped back with a low whistle. "This isn't a standard residential lock," he said. "It's a commercial model. Someone set it up with a programming code. Only a person who knew what they were doing could install it without leaving a mess." "Can you tell how long ago it was changed?" "Maybe a day or two, hard to say. But whoever did it wasn't guessing." He replaced the hardware and handed me the new keys. The metal felt heavier than the old set, as though the exchange symbolized more than a household repair. Before leaving, he added, "People usually upgrade like this when they want tighter control. You should keep an eye on things." That sentence followed me to the office. North Loop's energy pushed forward as usual, but my phone lit up with a message from our finance system before I reached my desk. A transfer notification flagged one of my departmental accounts. $150,000 had been moved through an approval I never signed. The internal auditor called a minute later. "Jonathan, we're seeing an unauthorized withdrawal. The signature matches yours, but the timing doesn't. The board wants you in the conference room." Walking toward that room felt like stepping straight into a corridor where everyone else had already formed conclusions. The board waited, each of them carrying printed copies of the forged approval. One member cleared her throat. "Until we determine what happened, we're suspending your system access. This protects both you and the company." There was no room to argue. I nodded, though the gesture tightened something in my chest. Losing access meant losing visibility. That loss allowed others to shape the next set of assumptions. While leaving the room, murmurs trailed behind me. They weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. Evan arrived later that afternoon, walking through the main doors with a worried expression he put on like a well-tailored coat. "I heard about the transfer," he said, patting my arm lightly. "Let me know how I can help. We need to contain this before it spirals." His tone suggested concern, yet his eyes drifted toward the office the board had just used. He wanted witnesses. He wanted people to see him next to me, presenting himself as the stable one. Another colleague approached him. "I didn't know you were still involved with the company," she said. "I'm not," he replied, chuckling softly. "Just trying to support an old friend." The message beneath the words spread faster than any memo. Jonathan's situation must be serious if Evan needed to step in. On the way home, my phone vibrated again. Lauren's name filled the screen, followed by a long text. She accused me of losing grip on both my marriage and career. According to her, everything happening now traced back to my inability to manage priorities. She framed herself as someone carrying the burden of my shortcomings. The tone of her messages mirrored the same script she had used for years, one where she positioned herself as the only reasonable person in a household, falling apart. Only this time, the stakes reached far beyond arguments in the kitchen. Family members chimed in next. "We don't know what's going on, but Lauren says you need help. Call us. She's worried sick." Those messages didn't ask for an explanation. They assumed one. Returning to the house felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory, even though everything looked the same. Sitting at my desk again, the weight of the situation pressed from every angle, professionally, personally, legally. My vantage point kept shrinking. Marissa called as evening settled. Her voice carried a sharper edge than earlier. "I found something," she said. "There's another loan package in draft form, much larger. It's prepared under your name. The paperwork is cleaner this time. Someone plans to submit it soon." "How soon?" "Hard to know, but the documents are complete. They just need a signature. If that goes through, you won't be able to claim any of this as identity misuse. It'll look like a pattern tied directly to you." Another silence formed as she flipped through pages. "This wasn't random, Jonathan. They've been building this for months." The admission landed like a stone. Whatever gap I'd left in my life, whatever space I'd created by stepping back, staying neutral, or holding too much trust, someone else had filled it with their own agenda. Marissa exhaled. "You need to move immediately. If you don't, you could lose your stake in the company." Her voice didn't rise, and she didn't repeat the statement for emphasis. She simply said it once, and the call ended soon after, leaving me with her final words echoing across the desk, while I stared at the forged documents spread in front of me. I sat across from Marissa, the papers scattered between us like a battlefield, every one of them marked with red. Every red mark felt like a sting to my pride, my company. Evan had been in this deeper than I realized. He'd been involved for much longer than I thought. I leaned forward, tracing the figures with my fingers, the consulting fees, standing out like a scar. It was a point I'd ignored for months, too absorbed in the day-to-day to question it. But it was the first step Evan had taken. The first sign of his manipulation. "We've got more than a dozen of these," Marissa said, her voice calm but tight. "These aren't just mistakes. This is planned. The weight of that statement sat heavy on me. I could feel my chest tighten, my breath slowing. How long was he in Marisa? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I had been too focused on running the company to notice the small cracks spreading under my feet. Marisa didn't answer directly, just flipped through the pages one after the other until she stopped at the loan agreement. I hadn't signed that. My signature wasn't anywhere near it. The panic started to claw its way up again, the same panic I'd felt when I saw that locked door earlier. It was a cold, sinking feeling. "They've already moved fast," she said, tapping the page. "And this loan, it's not even on your radar yet. This could break the company, Jonathan." I rubbed my temples, trying to clear my head. The more we went through, the more evidence stacked up against me. The board had already started asking questions. They'd want explanations that I didn't have. Lauren and Evan had covered their tracks too well, and now with the board breathing down my neck, I was stuck. No way out. "Tomorrow's the hearing," Marisa continued. "You'll need to show up." "Don't I always—" I muttered, my voice flat. "Yes," she said with a small nod. "But this time the stakes are higher, and you've got to answer the questions, Jonathan. They're already doubting you." I stood up suddenly, needing to move to get away from the pressure pushing against me. It felt like the walls were closing in. "I need a moment." The lobby was buzzing with the usual morning traffic, but none of it felt real. Everything felt distant now, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. The message from Lauren was long, too long, and it felt like a punch in the gut. She accused me of everything, of not being there, of failing the company, of failing our family. I read it again and again, the words sinking deeper each time. She knew how to hit every nerve. When I got home, there was a new message from Marisa. I read it quickly, my heart skipping a beat. "Jonathan, someone's planning against you. You need to act now." I stood still for a long time, not moving, just reading the message over and over. My mind raced. Was it Evan? Had he been planning all this while I just stood by? Then my phone buzzed again. Another email, this one from an unknown sender, a file, and with it more evidence. The email appeared like a shard of glass, sharp and cold, its contents slicing through the fog of confusion I'd been swimming in. It was an image, a screenshot. Evan in a dark corner of the server room plugging in a USB drive. The timestamp showed it was taken during the weekend, a time Evan claimed to be in Wisconsin. But the timestamp wasn't the only thing that caught my attention. The background was clear, the familiar hum of the office server racks, the very room that only a handful of people, myself included, had access to. The gravity of it settled in as the screen glowed back at me. There was no mistaking it, too detailed, too precise to dismiss. It was real. The rush of triumph never came. What replaced it was a hollow weight, a sense that this image was only one fragment of something far larger, a puzzle still refusing to take shape. Marisa met me in the Target Center parking lot. She stepped out of her car and walked over, eyes fixed on the image I had forwarded. After a brief pause, she straightened. "This wasn't tampered with," she said. "It's legitimate." A small spark of hope flickered and then dimmed. Hope could mislead. Whoever was behind this, if it was Evan, worked with precision. Rushing now would be a mistake. This could change everything I said. The words felt bitter. "It can," she replied, evenly holding my gaze. "But you know what happens when emotions take over." A nod was all that came back. Clear thinking was the only option left. Still doubt crept in. What if this came too late? What if this was only a minor win in a battle already lost? The phone buzzed before those thoughts could surface. Lauren's name filled the screen. A long message followed accusations stacked one after another. "You're unstable. You're unfit to lead. The company can't be left in your hands." A curse slipped out under my breath. Responding would only feed the fire. Her words were meant to provoke, to derail focus. Evan had already moved. Showing weakness now would only confirm the story they were building. Marissa broke the silence. Evan's filing for a temporary restraining order. He's claiming you're mentally unfit to run the company. Lauren's testimony is central. Something cold slid up my spine. Are you serious? The question barely carried above a whisper. I wish I wasn't, she said. It's spreading fast. People are saying the CEO is having a breakdown. The phone tightened in my grip as anger surged. The narrative had been flipped, Evan and Lauren pulling strings while I stood painted as the threat. Stay calm, Marissa said quietly. You have to be smarter than them. Another notification appeared before a reply could form. This one was from the bank. Your personal account has been frozen pending investigation into suspected fraud. That was the hit that landed deepest. Isolation closed in fast position, money credibility, all slipping out of reach at once. For a moment the world narrowed. Legs felt unsteady though they held. Then Marissa's voice cut through. Jonathan, there's still something they don't know. What are you talking about? She hesitated, then gave a small, deliberate nod. The old financial reports. The storage drive you kept from before the merger. If those files are intact, if you can trace what Evan did, there was no need to hear the rest. Turning away, I left. Urgency replaced fear. One chance remained, only one. Back home, the laptop waited. It had been years since that drive was last accessed. Fingers hovered, uncertainty pressing in, then moved. The drive spun to life. The password came back instinctively. As the files populated the screen, breath caught short. There they were, untouched, unaltered financial reports, clean records, a hidden trail leading straight to Evan. We spent the entire night at Marissa's office reviewing the original files. I could feel the weight of every moment stretching longer as we discovered more discrepancies, each line of data revealing the manipulation Evan had carried out for months. The timestamps matched perfectly with the time Evan had access to my house. I felt the fear creeping in again, that familiar old feeling of being overshadowed by someone else's voice, the voice I'd been too quiet to challenge. But now it was different. I wasn't avoiding it anymore. I wasn't letting fear take hold. I had the truth on my side. This time I would speak. Marissa was calm as we sifted through the files. This isn't just a mistake, Jonathan, she said, looking at the screen. This is deliberate. I nodded. My hands were steady as I clicked through the files. The fear had been replaced by something else. It wasn't just determination. It was a realization that I had let this happen by doing nothing, by remaining silent. But silence couldn't save me now. We need to present this, and we need to present it clearly, Marissa said, her voice practical. The board will want the facts laid out, no room for confusion. I knew she was right. I couldn't afford to hide behind explanations or excuses. I had to face it head on, just like I was facing my own mistakes. The data, the timeline, the proof, everything would speak for itself. We spent the next few hours preparing a detailed presentation. The evidence was clear: the unauthorized access to my email, the alteration of the financial reports, and the key evidence from the time-stamped camera footage. It wasn't just circumstantial anymore. It was methodical, calculated, and now irrefutable. At the next board meeting, I was calm as I set everything up. I didn't look around, didn't try to gauge anyone's reaction. I just clicked the button to pull up the screen. The first file came up, and then the next and the next. The entire room fell silent as the facts were laid bare before them. I didn't say a word. Evan tried to recover. This doesn't mean anything, he started, his voice shaky. I've never tampered with anything. A member of the technical team interrupted, looking at the data on the screen. This matches the devices Evan regularly uses. The timestamps are consistent with his access. I could see Evan's face falter. His confidence, which had seemed so unshakable before, started to crack. His mouth opened and closed, trying to find words, but there were none. The board didn't wait for him to recover. They pressed further. "And what about this?" another member asked, pointing to the footage of the camera at my house. "Lauren, do you have any explanation for why you had a spare key to Jonathan's house but never mentioned it?" Lauren stiffened her eyes, darting away from the question. She had no answer, no defense. The walls were closing in on her as much as they were on Evan. In the middle of the chaos, Evan snapped. He stood up abruptly, his face red, his voice rising. "This isn't what you think. I was just checking on things, checking his emails, just to make sure everything was under control." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. His confession, however accidental, hung in the air like a foul stench. "You were checking his emails?" the board member asked, their voice sharp. "Without permission?" Evan stumbled over his words, floundering for any excuse, but the damage had been done. The truth had slipped out, and there was no taking it back. Lauren was silent, her face pale. She knew she couldn't spin this one. She could only watch as Evan crumbled under the weight of his own lies. The board quickly turned their attention to the next step. "We will temporarily suspend Evan from all financial projects," one of them declared. "And the legal team will handle this from here." I didn't feel a sense of victory. Not yet, but the ground beneath my feet felt more solid than it had in days. I'd exposed the truth, and I had the power to stop them. As Evan was escorted out of the room by security, I stayed seated, my hands gripping the armrests of my chair. The chaos of the room faded into the background, but I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. There was still more to be done. I watched Evan being led out, his shoulders slumped, his face ashen. It wasn't over. But the pieces were finally starting to fit together. And I knew one thing for sure: this fight wasn't over yet. The door clicked shut behind Evan, and the room was filled with a tense silence. I didn't let out a breath, didn't let myself relax, not yet. There was still more coming. I could feel it. And I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Chapter 8: When Everything Falls Back into Place. I walked out of the conference room, my mind still processing the events that had unfolded. The room was buzzing with murmurs, but all I could focus on was the envelope Marisa handed me. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside. The papers felt heavy with finality. The first document was the court's approval to move forward with the fraud lawsuit against Evan. The second was Lauren's divorce filing. 2 pieces of paper, but they weighed more than anything I'd dealt with in my life. My hands shook slightly as I folded the corner of the envelope over. I felt the urge to look over both documents again, but I didn't. "How do you feel?" Marisa's voice cut through the fog of my thoughts. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't want to feel anything right now. I had worked for too long to get here. To let myself unravel now would be pointless. I had to hold it together. That's how it was. That's how I had to move forward. I glanced at Marisa, her face neutral, but there was something in her eyes, concern maybe, or just the burden of having lived through the same nightmare with me. She didn't press for an answer. Instead, she just said, "This isn't over, Jonathan. But it's the beginning of something different." Her words lingered in the air. I wasn't sure if I was ready for anything different yet, but it seemed like that was the only direction left. I made my way back to my office. The building felt like a ghost town now. It was as if the weight of what had happened had sucked the life out of the walls. I didn't have the energy to deal with it all right now. But there was still one thing I needed to do. I signed the papers without hesitation, no second guessing, no looking back. I didn't need to justify it anymore. The silence of the decision felt stronger than any words could have. Evan would face the consequences of his actions. The company would be free of him, and so would I, Lauren. She had already taken her stand. There was no room left for negotiation or apologies. It wasn't about revenge, it was about closure, something I'd been chasing for too long. I packed up a few of my things' papers, the items I'd left on my desk. There was no fanfare, no dramatic final exit. I just left the office, walked down the long hallway that had felt so oppressive, and stepped outside. It was late afternoon when I arrived at the apartment in Uptown. The building was smaller than what I was used to, but it had a certain charm, the kind of charm that didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. I liked it. It felt like a fresh start, something that didn't come with the weight of history. I set my things down on the kitchen counter, not making any decisions yet, just letting the day settle. My old life was behind me. The legal battles, the lies, the brokenness. It was all part of a chapter that was closing. Later, I slipped into my sneakers something simple. The walk to Bide Makaska felt grounding. The air was cooler than it had been earlier in the day, and the water shimmered in the light, but I wasn't there for the view. I wasn't trying to escape either. The walk was just a reminder, a way to keep myself grounded, to stay humble. Each step felt deliberate, as if I was planting the seed for a new routine. No more dodging questions or pretending everything was fine. No more carrying the weight of things that weren't mine to carry. I wasn't that person anymore. The old Jonathan, the one who had let everything slip away, he was gone. I returned home after the walk, a quiet evening ahead of me. There was no rush to fill the silence, no need to talk about what had happened. The apartment was small, but it was mine. It felt safe. It felt like I could finally breathe. The last thing I did before heading to bed was to lock the door. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was small but powerful. It wasn't just the door. It was a gesture, a symbol of the boundaries I was learning to respect in my own life. I was finally learning what it meant to protect what mattered, to not let anyone else dictate what I could and couldn't keep. As the door clicked shut, I stood there for a moment. No dramatic reflections, no grand realization. Just the sound of the lock and the quiet settling into a new rhythm. And just like that, everything was in its place.